At my son's $400,000 wedding, he shooed me away like a stray dog. Also, his social media princess could get her perfect photos. I had taken one step too close to the floral arch when I felt it. The soft hiss of my son's voice in my ear, almost reptilian, as if he were trying not to startle me or the cameras. His hand brushed the air like he was swatting a fly. I took a step back, then another, until I was out of frame. I remember looking down at my shoes, modest beige pumps, comfortable, practical. I had chosen them carefully, no rhinestones, no click in the heel, so I wouldn't make noise on the gravel as I approached the ceremony space. I hadn't imagined I wouldn't be allowed to approach at all. The usher at the side, a young man in a headset with a clipboard, gave me a polite nod as if to confirm my exit, as if this had been rehearsed. And maybe it had. The guests stared without staring. Averted glances, tight smiles. One woman in a blush silk gown looked at me with something almost like pity. Almost. But no one said a word. I stepped away from the arch and returned to the side path, where the heat from the overhead string lights pulsed against my scalp. I clutched the small envelope in my purse. It still held the printout of the final transfer, $284,000 wired from the sale of the house. The rest had been drawn from my retirement, and just enough kept back to live on. A calculated sacrifice. A gift I'd planned quietly, with pride. As the ceremony began, the officiant spoke into a mic clipped to his collar. The couple laughed at the right moments. The bride tilted her face just so when the camera drone circled overhead. My son held her hand tightly, as if he were grounding her, but his eyes never searched the crowd for me. Not once. I wasn't in the family row. That space was reserved for the bride's parents, her sisters, and two women I didn't recognize, but who wore matching champagne shawls and took selfies throughout the vows. My seat was listed on the program as C23. The usher had to consult a separate clipboard to locate it. When I finally found it, it was behind a service pillar. I had to crane my neck to see the stage. Two caterers stood beside me, quietly arranging napkins in a crate. No one said my name. Not during the vows, not during the toasts, not when the DJ introduced the people who made this dream possible. And when my son raised his glass and said, "We built this ourselves," I heard a strange sound in my throat. It wasn't a gasp. It wasn't a sob. It was the sound of something closing. After the ceremony, as the guests filtered toward the cocktail lawn, I waited behind the column. The caterers had already vanished with the napkin crate, replaced now by a stack of trays and an empty ice bucket. I stood for a moment before stepping out, smoothing my dress, the navy one with the capped sleeves and subtle beading at the collar. I had chosen it to look like a mother of someone. Not a distraction, not background noise, just seen. No one came to find me. I made my way slowly toward the reception tent, scanning for my name on the seating chart displayed in a gilded frame, tiny calligraphy cards arranged under glass. My name wasn't among the immediate family section. It was listed lower, under extended guests, sandwiched between the name of a photographer's assistant and someone from the venue team. I checked again. Claire Dawson, table 12. The family table, table 1, was positioned directly in front of the stage, lit by candles and flanked by two cameramen. The bride's parents were already seated, the mother adjusting her bracelet, while the father leaned back in his chair, laughing. I had barely stepped toward my own table when a woman with a headset gently intercepted me. I nodded. I stood quietly to the side, near the bar station, where someone had spilled a streak of champagne across the lacquered edge. I watched as the servers brought out the plated hors d'oeuvres. I watched as my son and his new wife took their seats on a low platform with gold initials behind them. I watched as people raised glasses and phones, and laughter rose in soft waves. And when they toasted financial independence and building something from nothing, my chest tightened. Not because it was untrue, but because it was the version of truth they'd chosen, the one without me in it. No one mentioned the house I sold, the one my husband and I bought when we were just 26, with mismatched curtains and a cherry tree in the backyard. No one knew, or pretended not to know, what I had liquidated to make this day happen. At table 12, I sat behind a decorative column. I could hear the speeches but couldn't see the screen where they were projecting family photos. Someone handed me a starter plate late. It was half warm and missing the garnish. I smiled at the server and said nothing. I told myself there would be a moment, maybe during the dance, maybe during the cake cutting, when my son would come find me. Maybe he'd thank me. Maybe he'd say something simple like, "I'm glad you're here." But the night moved on without that moment. And when the lights dimmed for their first dance, and the crowd formed a perfect circle, I realized that I had been left outside it. I left before the cake was cut. No one stopped me. The valet station was down a winding gravel path, lined with lanterns, all flickering in soft amber tones. The night air had finally cooled, and somewhere behind the hedge I could still hear the DJ announcing a surprise dance set. Laughter followed, muffled by distance. I sat alone on a low stone bench, waiting for my number to be called. A server passed me without recognition. I wondered briefly if they thought I was staff on break. When the car came around, I handed the ticket to a young man in a vest who smiled but didn't look me in the eye. My heels clicked softly against the concrete as I slid into the back seat. I didn't cry. Instead, I leaned my head against the window and watched the trees bend in the breeze. My phone buzzed twice. Notifications from the bride's Instagram stories. I opened one. It was a wide-angle shot of the ceremony arch, her veil caught mid-sway, the ocean glittering behind them like it had been planned by algorithm. The caption read, "Manifested love, a dream we built from scratch, self-made." I watched the next video. My son was giving his toast, his smile easy, his words clear. "Everything we have today is because we believed in our vision. We did this ourselves, from nothing." A cheer rose from the crowd. He never looked toward the camera. He never mentioned the person who wired the money, who sold a house to build their dream. My hands felt cold. When I reached the small rental condo I'd been living in since the sale, I dropped my purse on the hallway chair and walked to the kitchen. The envelope was still there, untouched. The one with the printout of the wire transfer, dated 8 months ago. I had folded it neatly, like a document that mattered. I poured a cup of water but didn't drink it. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the hallway, listening to the silence settle. There was no message from him, no text, no thank you. I changed out of the dress carefully, hung it on the back of the closet door, sat on the edge of the bed for a long while, staring at the reflection in the dark window. There was no anger, not yet. Only the feeling of having slipped out of someone else's story while they continued living it as if I'd never been part of the first chapter. That night, I dreamed of the old house, of the creak in the hallway floor near the linen closet, of the cherry tree outside the kitchen window, heavy with blossoms. I woke just before dawn with the taste of dirt in my mouth, as if I'd been trying to dig something back up in my sleep. The next morning, I opened the envelope again. Not because I needed to see it, I'd memorized the numbers, but because I needed to feel the weight of what it'd done. The transaction read like a receipt, $284,000. Final proceeds. Wire transfer complete. The beneficiary listed was a Shell LLC. My son had set it up last winter. I hadn't questioned it then. I wanted to make things easier. That phrase circled back, soft and embarrassing. Make things easier. I made tea and let it go cold. The condo walls still smelled like paint and drywall dust, like it had never been properly lived in. I hadn't even hung the art from the old house. It didn't seem right, transplanting things that belonged to somewhere with memory. I walked room to room that morning, the way you do when you're trying to confirm you still exist. In the hall closet, the same plastic bin with my husband's old pension paperwork. In the cabinet drawer, the good silverware from holidays that never came. And in the back bedroom closet, the file box I hadn't opened since the move. I carried it to the kitchen and sat at the table. The folders were still labeled in my handwriting: taxes, retirement, deed, notes. I pulled out the paperwork for the house sale. It had gone fast. Under 2 weeks, all cash. The buyer was a developer. They tore the place down 3 months later. I'd seen the photos online. Construction fencing wrapped around the place like crime scene tape. The cherry tree was gone too. I flipped through the final agreement. Nestled between the escrow page and the closing costs was a note from my realtor. This closes the last of the retirement accounts. Let me know if you'd like a referral for financial planning post-sale. I hadn't replied. What would I have said? That I didn't need retirement anymore because I was paying for someone else's beginning? I laid the pages out on the table, side by side with the wedding invitation, the seating chart, the transfer slip. All of it together looked like a portfolio, or evidence. Something cold started to take shape. I logged into my bank account, moving slowly, carefully. Not sure what I was even looking for. I clicked through recent activity, then further back. There were other charges I didn't recognize: design consultants, venue deposits, a line item for a luxury content production team, $9,800. The timestamp, the week after I signed over the house. I clicked print. The machine buzzed and stuttered, coughing out each page like it was choking on the truth. I watched them fall into the tray, one after another. Then I reached for the red folder I'd nearly thrown away last month. Instead, I opened it, and I began to file. I didn't tell anyone, not Joan next door, not the woman at the bank who used to help me with online login resets, not even my sister, who would have called it what it was before I was ready to say it aloud. I just kept printing. Statement after statement, transaction after transaction. Things I hadn't noticed because I hadn't been looking. Charges routed through secondary accounts I didn't know we had. Transfers labeled business development, content staging, equipment rentals. One from a luxury travel agency listed under branding retreat. Each one was small enough to ignore. But together, they hummed with intention. I made a spreadsheet. It felt strange, typing my own name into the cell marked payer. Stranger still to type my son's under-recipient. I found the company his LLC was registered to. The name meant nothing, some generic blend of initials and ambition. But the business address was familiar. It was my old house, the one I sold, the one I no longer owned. I closed the laptop slowly. My hands were shaking, but not from anger. It was something tighter, older, like the moment you realize the door you thought was locked had been open the whole time, and someone had come and gone, over and over, while you stood on the other side thinking you were safe. I pulled the deed paperwork from the box again and stared at the signatures. Mine, of course. his, as witness. But there was something odd about the date on the witness line. It had been signed 2 days before I met with the notary. I turned to the account summary. The dates didn't line up, not by much, but enough. Enough to know this wasn't sloppiness. It was choreography. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at the table with the pages spread out like tiles, trying to find the pattern. And the more I looked, the more I saw it. There had been a plan, not just a wedding, a rollout, a story, a clean narrative built on the back of mine, polished until it looked like self-made success. The home he said he grew up with nothing in, that was my home. The company he said he built alone, that was my roof. The money he said he saved from scratch, that was my future, broken into withdrawals and funneled into someone else's dream. I turned on the desk lamp. It cast a wide arc of light over the table. My eyes burned, but I didn't stop. I added one more tab to the spreadsheet, timeline of access. It wasn't just money, it was identity. And he'd been wearing mine like a borrowed coat for months. 3 days later, I made an appointment. Not with the financial advisor I used to see, the one who called everyone dear and still used a fountain pen. I needed someone sharper now. I searched online for a local firm that specialized in estate review and financial misrepresentation. The name that came up most was a woman, Elena Voss. Her website didn't have a photo, just a line of clean text that read, "Integrity doesn't ask for permission." I emailed. She responded within the hour. The building was newer, glass and metal, tucked behind a medical plaza. I sat in the waiting area while a man in a charcoal suit walked past without looking at me. The air smelled like toner and lemon cleaner. I had brought the red folder in a canvas bag. It felt heavier than it was. When Elena came out to meet me, she was younger than I expected. Early 40s, maybe. Crisp blouse, no jewelry. Her voice was calm but direct. In the small conference room, I laid out the papers. I didn't dramatize. I didn't cry. I didn't even say his name for the first 10 minutes. I walked her through the wedding transfer, the house sale, the LLC registration, the inconsistent dates. I showed her the spreadsheet, the flagged bank statements, the business payments tagged under my name. She listened, didn't interrupt. Occasionally nodded, jotting notes on a legal pad. When I paused, she asked one question. "Did you give him written authorization for any of this?" "No," I said. "Only the wedding money. That was mine to give." "And the house?" "I sold it willingly," I said. "But I didn't know what he'd done with the address after. I didn't know he was using it as collateral." She sat back and tapped her pen against the pad. "Then it's not just deception," she said. "It's structure. It's misappropriation with a narrative." The phrase made something click in my chest. Not pain, not shame, clarity. I asked what would happen next. She explained that we could begin with a formal inquiry, a request for accounting and access logs through both the bank and state records, that we didn't have to accuse him, not yet, that we could simply ask for proof. And if he refuses? Then we escalate. Quietly, if you prefer. She slid a document across the table, a basic engagement form. "You're not the first mother to walk in here," she said gently, "but I've never met one who brought a timeline this precise." I signed. It felt like drawing a boundary in ink. When I left, I didn't go straight home. I drove past the lot where my old house used to stand. The new build wasn't finished yet, just wood frames and open beams. I rolled down the window. For a moment, I thought I heard the echo of something I'd forgotten. The clink of my old wind chimes, maybe, or the creak of the gate. I waited a moment longer, then drove away. 4 days after I signed the paperwork, a card arrived in my mailbox. Pale mint, thick stock, embossed edges. My name printed in a neat serif font across the front. No return address. I opened it at the kitchen counter. Inside, Melody's handwriting. Or her assistant's. I couldn't tell. We understand there's been some confusion regarding recent events. We're hoping to resolve everything amicably. No need for legal involvement. Let's move forward with love, not litigation. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just airbrushed language, softened edges, a velvet glove over an iron dismissal. They didn't even mention the wedding, or the house, or the account. Just a vague misunderstanding, as though I'd misread a brunch invitation or gotten the RSVP date wrong. I set the card beside the folder. It looked absurd, like a birthday note misplaced in a legal file. Later that evening, my lawyer called. Elena's voice was as calm as ever. "They've responded," she said, "through counsel." They? Zane and Melody, a joint letter. They'd like to offer you a personal repayment agreement, undisclosed sum, no court filing, full non-disclosure clause. How much? She gave the number. It was less than the wedding. I let the silence stretch until it felt full. "They're not offering money," I said finally. "They're offering erasure." Eleanor didn't disagree. "We don't have to respond right away," she said. "But if we proceed, we'll need to lock down your records. That means notarized timelines, statements, full documentation of consent, and lack thereof." "I have all of it," I said. "It's in the red folder." "You may be the most organized client I've had this year." "I spent 30 years managing other people's paperwork," I said. Turns out I should have been watching my own. After we hung up, I pulled out a fresh pad of paper. Not for evidence, just to anchor myself. I made a new list. Every document I had touched, signed, witnessed, filed. I wrote my name at the top of the page. Then I said it out loud. Just once. Claire Dawson. Not Mom. Not mother of the groom. Not "thank you for your generosity." In a pale pink card. Just Claire. I placed the letter from Melody in the red folder, behind the transfer receipt, behind the LLC record, behind the spreadsheet with the branding retreat. Later that night, I watched the wedding recap video on their joint Instagram page. A curated highlight reel, camera drones, slow-motion spins, ambient music, the bride spinning like a ballerina in a $1,000 dress. The caption, "From nothing to everything." We built this dream, brick by brick. No handouts, just hustle. My son smiled in every frame. I didn't recognize the man in the video, but I remembered the boy who used to sit on the porch steps, sticky-fingered from popsicles, asking what clouds were made of. I closed the laptop slowly. This wasn't confusion. This was clarity. By the following morning, I knew what I had to do. Not just gather, not just document, but declare. There was a difference between filing away facts and submitting a statement. One was private control. The other was acknowledgement in the world's eyes. And I'd spent long enough being edited out of narratives that were built with my hands. I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and the red folder beside me. I didn't open it yet. I didn't need to. I began writing. Not an affidavit, not a legal motion. Just the plain truth, told plainly. I wrote about the house. How we bought it for $112,000 in 1993. how we replaced the roof in 2006 after the big storm, how we planted a cherry tree in the backyard the spring after my husband's diagnosis, because he said he wanted to leave behind something that would keep blooming even if he didn't. I wrote about the savings, the retirement accounts, the CDs I never touched, the years I lived frugally because I assumed I'd need every penny later. I wrote about how it felt to sit at that wedding and realize I'd already spent my later on someone else's today. I wrote about the wire transfer and the signature I placed under the belief that generosity was a kind of glue, that paying for something would mean I still belonged inside it. I wrote about the Instagram captions, the speeches, the seating chart, the place behind the pillar next to the catering tray. I ended with one sentence. This is not about money. This is about being removed from the record of your own life. I printed it, signed and dated it, sealed it in an envelope and mailed a copy to Elena, along with everything else. By the afternoon, she had replied, "We'll attach this to the inquiry. It will be part of the permanent submission. They can't withdraw what's already been received." That sentence landed with weight, not aggressive, not threatening, just final. They can't withdraw what's already been received. That night, I changed the sheets in the guest room, not because I was expecting anyone, but because I wanted one room in the house to feel new again. I opened the windows, let the spring air in. It smelled faintly of something green and trying. I set the red folder on the desk by the wall and lit a candle nearby. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was preparing for a defense. I felt like I was preserving something, naming something, marking ground. The following day, I received a second letter, this one certified mail, from Zane's legal representative, another offer, a revised settlement, a higher number, still contingent on silence, still dependent on forgetting, still tethered to an NDA like a leash. I didn't hesitate this time. I returned it unopened. Instead, I added one more page to the red folder. The envelope itself, unbroken, proof that I had been offered a quiet exit and declined. That night, I made soup. Simple, from scratch. I ate slowly, without music, without distraction. There was a peace in the ordinary again, now that the noise had purpose. This wasn't about revenge. It never had been. It was about choosing not to vanish. The courthouse sat low and quiet behind a row of hedges. Not grand, just functional. I arrived 10 minutes early, clutching a folder that was now so full its clasp wouldn't close. Elena met me on the steps. She wore a navy blouse and flat shoes. No makeup. Her presence, like always, was efficient and steady. Nothing performative, nothing to prove. "This isn't a trial," she reminded me. "It's a motion hearing, a request to freeze access to disputed assets until the investigation completes." I nodded. It wasn't the legal weight that made me nervous. It was the fact that I had to stand in a room and say what happened, out loud, where it would be written down by someone who didn't know me at all. Inside, the air was still. The walls painted the kind of beige that forgets it ever had colour. A court clerk called our case number. We were ushered into a narrow hearing room with 2 tables and a podium. The judge looked over the top of her glasses at us. She was in her 60s, maybe older, hair pulled into a low twist. No visible reactions. Just a stamp of institutional experience. "Are the respondents present?" she asked. Elena glanced across the aisle at the empty chairs. "No, Your Honour. They were served and confirmed receipt, but they've declined to appear." The judge's pen paused in mid-air. Just a breath. Just enough to be noted. Elena laid out the timeline. Clean, chronological, unemotional. She presented the original deed to the house, the timeline of the wire transfers, the business registration using Claire's former address, the transactions traced back to joint access accounts, the curated social media posts used in brand promotion funded by Claire's resources. She placed the Instagram screenshots into evidence. Not as an accusation of fraud, Elena said, but as documentation of a false public narrative used to justify financial gain. The judge flipped through the exhibits slowly. Her expression never changed. Then came the final document, my written statement. Elena handed it over without embellishment. "This is from Ms. Dawson," she said. She requested it be included in the record. The judge read the first few lines silently. I watched her eyes move. Then she looked at me. "You don't need to speak unless you wish to," she said. I nodded, then found myself standing anyway. "I'm not asking for anything back," I said, my voice quieter than I expected. "Not the house, not the money. I gave those freely. What I'm asking for is the space to name what happened and to keep it from happening again." The judge didn't respond, not directly. She tapped the stack of papers gently into order. "Motion granted," she said. "All disputed assets are frozen pending full review. Further filings may proceed as standard." Her tone wasn't sympathetic, it was procedural, but to me, it felt like breath returning to a collapsed lung. We walked out without ceremony. No news cameras, no bystanders. Just the metal clang of the front doors closing behind us. In the parking lot, Eleanor turned to me. "If they continue to ignore court correspondence, we'll escalate. But even if they comply now, we've established precedent." She paused, then said, almost gently, "You've been formally seen." I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant. Just steady. When I got home, I placed the stamped hearing confirmation on top of the red folder. The legal seal was faint, just a pale watermark at the edge. But it was there. That evening, I walked the perimeter of my little condo. The air was cool. Somewhere nearby, a neighbour's wind chime struck 3 soft notes in the breeze. Inside, I made a cup of tea and sat by the window. Not because I was waiting for anything, because I wasn't. I had done what needed doing, without apology, without spectacle. It didn't make me feel victorious. It made me feel real again. 3 days after the hearing, Elena forwarded me an email from opposing counsel. It was not an apology. It was a pivot. The tone had shifted. No longer offers or denials, but implications. They suggested I had been experiencing difficulties with memory, that certain decisions had perhaps been misunderstood due to signs of emotional strain, that I had authorized things I had since forgotten. It was dressed up in legal cushioning, full of passive phrasing and tentative verbs. But the message was clear. They weren't arguing the facts anymore. They were arguing me. Elena called me before I even had a chance to process it. "They're preparing a claim of diminished capacity," she said. "If they try to reframe your financial decisions as confused or unstable, they can undermine the entire timeline. And if I stay silent, they win by default." There was a long pause. Then I said, "We'll respond." That afternoon, I made another list. But this one wasn't about money. It was about competence. Every detail I had managed since Thomas died, every document I had filed, every committee I had chaired. I wrote down the library board meetings I'd recorded minutes for, the year I helped my neighbour Joan file her taxes over the phone, the last 5 years of scholarship applications I'd reviewed for the local fund. I called Joan that evening. She listened quietly, then said, without hesitation, "I remember. You did all the calculations? Bob still tells people you saved us from a penalty." "Would you write that down?" I asked. "I'd be proud to." By the end of the week, I had 7 letters, none of them dramatic, all of them honest. The nurse who oversaw Thomas's hospice care wrote about my color-coded medication chart. The head librarian referenced the hours I spent balancing budgets and negotiating municipal funding. A woman I mentored through the scholarship program recalled the exact language I'd used to review her essay, kind but precise. Eleanor compiled them into a single exhibit. Character evidence, she called it. Competency through pattern. We didn't need declarations of sainthood. We needed proof of presence. Meanwhile, Zane's team continued filing motions. One claimed I had misinterpreted business structuring. Another accused me of retaliatory behavior. Elena responded to each one with quiet precision. No embellishment. Just timeline, document, fact. One night, as I stood in the bathroom brushing my teeth, I looked at myself in the mirror and said my full name aloud again. Claire Dawson. I didn't say it with defiance, just clarity. I was not confused. I was not unstable. I was not losing track of time or memory or reason. What I was inconvenient. To people who benefited from me disappearing into the backdrop. Not anymore. 2 weeks later, the closed hearing was scheduled. No press, no audience. Just court staff, a judge, and a room made heavy with the kind of silence that demands truth. Eleanor and I arrived early. She had reorganized the red folder into color-coded exhibits, each tab marked with a single word: transfer, registration, capacity, statements, narrative. We waited outside the chamber until the bailiff called us in. The judge from the earlier motion hearing was presiding again. Her robe was crisp, her expression unreadable. She greeted us with a nod and turned to the empty row on the respondent's side. But it wasn't empty. Zane was there, alone. No lawyer, no melody, no clipboard. Just a grey suit and his face. Drawn, tight, unfamiliar. He didn't look at me. When the judge asked if he was waiving counsel, he said yes, barely above a whisper. His voice sounded like paper. Then the hearing began. Elena presented the evidence as she always did. Calm, measured, exact. She began with the financial documents, the traceable transfers from my account to the LLC, the proof that I was unaware of its use in personal gain, the house deed signed under separate false pretenses. Each item labelled, timed, notarized. Then the business registrations, use of my name and former property to secure contracts and sponsorships without my knowledge. Then the digital branding material, Instagram posts, business bios, and public narratives that framed the wedding and related ventures as entirely self-funded, completely independent. Down to phrases like, built it from the ground up with nothing but hustle. Finally, she introduced the letters. The statements attesting to my mental clarity, my administrative reliability, my decade-spanning track record of managing finances, health records, charitable foundations. One by one, their voices entered the room. The judge asked no questions yet. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't read a prepared statement. I looked at the judge. "I am not asking for punishment," I said. "I am asking for recognition." I paused. What was taken from me is not just money, or a house, or a name on a contract. It was authorship. My role in a life I helped build, rewritten without my consent. I didn't look at Zane while I spoke. I couldn't. Not because I was afraid of what I'd see, but because I already knew. When I finished, the judge finally turned to him. "Would you like to respond?" He cleared his throat. His hands twisted together in his lap. He looked at the floor when he said it. "I didn't think it would matter. Not, I didn't do it. Not, it wasn't what it looked like. Just that." The judge said nothing for a long while. Then she closed the folder in front of her. "This court will issue a written decision within 10 business days. All matters submitted will be considered as part of the permanent record." She stood. The hearing was over. Eleanor and I gathered our things without a word. In the hallway, Zane stepped forward. His voice was softer now, more like the boy I once knew. "Mom," he said. It wasn't a question, not even a request, just a word he used to know how to say. I looked at him. I saw the crease in his collar, the way he couldn't hold eye contact, the thinness of his apology before it even formed. I didn't speak, not out of cruelty, but because I didn't owe him the comfort of pretending this hadn't happened. I walked past him. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like it had somewhere to be. In the car, Elena turned to me. "That was more than I expected," she said. I nodded. "Less than I once hoped." We didn't speak the rest of the drive. At home, I added the hearing transcript to the red folder, tucked it in the fireproof box with the signed statement, the court seal, the letters of character, the printed emails. Not for revenge, not for protection, for record, for the day someone else might need to remember what was true. That night, I sat on the porch, wrapped in an old shawl. The moon was low and full. The street was quiet. I listened to the world move gently around me, no longer asking for permission to exist in it. The envelope came on a Tuesday morning. It was pale blue with a stamped seal from the probate court, tucked in between a grocery store flyer and a community newsletter. The postman, the same one who always tipped his cap but never lingered, placed it carefully in my mailbox like he knew, somehow, that this one mattered more. I brought it inside and set it on the kitchen table. I didn't open it right away. I brewed tea, let it steep, stirred in honey, let it sit again. There was no one waiting on the other end of the ruling. No party, no phone tree, no lawyer bracing for impact. It was just me, the quiet kitchen, and the window overlooking a modest flower bed where my husband's old spade still leaned, rusted, against the fence. When I finally slit the envelope open, the paper inside was crisp, the ink a dark and formal blue. The court had ruled in my favor. They had found sufficient evidence of willful misrepresentation, misuse of funds, and fraudulent asset manipulation. The Wedding LLC was dissolved under court order. All financial ties traced through my former accounts were deemed unauthorized. Any public claim of self-funded assets relating to those transactions was to be retracted if disputed in future legal proceedings. The court hadn't gone for drama. There were no flourishes, just lines of conclusion. The 2016 will was reinstated. All estate assets were frozen under my authority until further review. Zane was removed from all financial oversight positions, pending formal inquiry. It was what we'd asked for, but more than that, it was recorded, stamped, filed, legally acknowledged. I sat for a long time with the letter in my lap. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed in the feeling of something being put back in its rightful place. Not with fanfare, but with finality. Later that afternoon, Elena stopped by. She brought pastries from the corner bakery. She didn't stay long, just sat at the kitchen counter for a few minutes, sipping her tea and watching the wind tug at the garden outside. You did everything right, she said, standing to leave, whether they ever say it or not. After she left, I opened the fireproof box. I placed the court's ruling behind the hearing transcript, closed the latch, set the box back on the closet shelf, not to bury it, but to keep it where it would be safe and easy to find if ever needed. That night, I boiled potatoes and made a roast, just like I used to when Thomas came home early from work on Thursdays. I lit a candle at the table, ate slowly. The chair across from me was empty, but it didn't feel lonely. It just felt quiet. The next day, a letter arrived from Melody, not handwritten, printed, professional stationery, her initials embossed at the top. She wrote that she hoped I was well and healing. She wrote that she believed no one intended to cause harm, and that moving forward as a family would be better for everyone involved. She mentioned Zane's sleep habits, his stress, how the children were asking where Grandma was. She never used the word apology. She never mentioned the ruling. I folded the letter and placed it next to the envelope from the court. The contrast was almost poetic. Truth beside performance. Paperweight beside perfume. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked to the small park at the edge of the neighborhood. It was warm for early spring, and the cherry trees there had begun to bloom, late but determined. The air was thick with that soft green scent of something coming back to life. I sat on a bench under the shade and watched as two children raced past, laughing, tripping over the corner of a picnic blanket. Their mother called after them with just enough sternness to be loving. I thought of the house I gave up, the retirement I cracked open like a nest egg too early, the wedding I funded but was edited out of. I thought about the months of silence, the hiss of my son's voice at the altar, the seat behind the pillar, the champagne glass raised without my name. And I thought, none of that defines me now, not because it didn't hurt, but because I chose what came next. 2 days later, I met with my estate advisor. We finalized updates to my will, reinstating the scholarship fund, redirecting a portion of my savings to a shelter program for displaced older women, the same one I used to volunteer at during the holidays. I put the house I now lived in, small but mine, into a trust, not to be sold, but used someday by a local foundation for transitional housing. I created a clause preserving Thomas's historical work in the Veteran Archive, specifying that it must never be deleted, merged, or rebranded. His handwriting would live on paper, not get filtered through someone else's lens. These weren't punishments. They were corrections, not of other people, but of silence. That weekend, I baked a peach cobbler and brought it to Joan's house. We sat on her patio drinking tea, talking about nothing and everything. Her bad knees, my garden's stubborn herbs, a recipe from a magazine she swore used too much cardamom. Her laugh was loud and unfiltered. It made me laugh too. The sound of it filled the space between us easily, without cost. That night, I walked the length of the backyard. The garden had started to fill in again. Rosemary, sage, small buds of lavender. Things grow back if you let them, even after being cut to the root, even if no one comes back to say they were wrong. I sat on the porch steps with a blanket around my shoulders and my tea growing cold beside me. I didn't need a final word. The record had already spoken, and I was in it.